Carol's going to be joining us with the weather. Let's take you back, though, to Stephen Lawrence's murder in London in 1993. Still one of the most famous race-hate crimes in the UK, of course.
Yes, it forced us all in Britain to confront difficult issues of race and prejudice, and an inquiry into police mishandling of the case led to changes in public policy and the law.
Much of that change came about through the sheer determination of the Lawrence family. So with two finally convicted of the murder, let's hear first from Stephen's mother, Doreen. Here she is.
People say to me, well, you know, how strong you are. I don't think I'm strong. I don't think I'm strong at all. I just think, you know, there's something there carrying me and helping me through. So I'm not doing it on my own. I don't forgive the boys who've killed Stephen. Because at the moment, no, because, you know, they don't think they've done anything wrong. They took away Stephen's life. And there's nothing in them, in their behaviour or anything to show that they regret what their actions have done and the pain that it's caused us as a family.
Doreen Lawrence speaking to the BBC. Let's talk now to Superintendent Leroy Logan, who was a founding member of the National Black Police Association. Also here, Brian Cathcart. Brian wrote a book called The Case of Stephen Lawrence. And morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. And Leroy, if I can start with you, because you've met the Lawrences. You can see why Doreen Lawrence said yesterday, this is not a day for celebration. A quote was, this day could have come 18 years ago had the police who were meant to find my son's killers not failed so miserably. Difficult day for her.
Yeah, and obviously we have to recognise the personal loss, but their determination for you know, justice, and justice has been seen to be done. Yesterday, I was at the Old Bailey yesterday with Doreen and Neville, and you know, I was able to say to them that there is a certain amount of closure. Obviously, they'll never be able to lose that pain, but at least they can say that they've changed policing and the wider justice system by the fact that they pushed it through from the private prosecution, the Macpherson inquiry, which I call the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and of course now into the conviction yesterday.
Brian, you started investigating a story, what, about 14 years
15 years ago, yes.
How was policing then on this kind of case? What did you find then?
Well, I think the big difference, I think, is that back then when the Lawrences complained that things were not going right, and they were very, very quickly onto that. I mean, within a week, the police said, sort of, talk to the hand. They just weren't interested in communicating with them. And you can see in the documentation that came out, the police documentation, it was the Lawrences are a pain, they're a nuisance, they're an irritation, and that sort of brushing off. I don't think we'd get quite the same thing nowadays. They were treated as sort of black extremists because basically the police had never really given the thought to dealing with black people with a grievance. Until they came up against the Lawrences.
Leroy, you were speaking about the inquiry that looked into the Metropolitan Police's handling of this case and came up with all sorts of things, saying that it was incompetent and things hadn't been addressed immediately and the case was overlooked for quite some time. Do you think, though, that police has changed radically since that inquiry, and if so, how?
Yeah. In terms of that initial response to any sort of critical incident, major investigation, there's been critical incidents training for senior investigators. So as a result of that, the actual freezing of the scene, the obtaining of evidence, the interviewing of suspects and witnesses is a lot more objective, a lot more understanding of diversity and how to connect with people. So there's not these assumptions that were made, as with Stephen believing he was involved in a gang or anything of that nature. But saying that, there's been like family liaison officers that came from the inquiry, independent advisors, community support units to deal with hate crime and to do that in a lot more objective manner. But I still think there's a lot more to do because, unfortunately, we still see the disproportionalities in terms of service delivery,
Stop and search.
Terrorism, the DNA database. 80% of black people or BME, black minority ethnic people, are on the DNA database, and there's still disproportionality in terms of charge and kept in custody and penalties in the wider justice system.
Brian, in terms of the case itself, there are 3 other suspects in the case who everyone knows they are, the faces on the front page of some of the papers this morning, and yet the police investigation is in limbo, if you like.
Yes, well, we have to assume that when they launched this prosecution, they reviewed all the evidence that was available at present against all of those suspects. And they came to the conclusion that there was only a winnable case against 2 of them. That said, I never believed that we would get to 2 convictions, so perhaps with the passage of more time, they can go back to the forensic evidence and maybe they'll find more.
You write a piece in today's Independent, Brian, which talks about the fact that this case made everybody confront racism, but racism still exists in society.
Yeah.
So how far do you think this case has led us as a society in terms of things
I think
changing?
that reflects that I mentioned about denial, about saying, you know, about the sort of most of the sort of white establishment of Britain did not want to listen to black people with grievances back in the early 90s. And I think, while it's not welcomed these days, I think we have moved on in the sense that there is a listening process, and there's not the instant dismissal that there once was. I think people understand that racism, for example, isn't just about extremists and bad apples and all those other theories that people had. It is something that you find everywhere. And as Jack Straw said, when the Lawrence Inquiry report came out in '99, he said, institutional racism, you'll probably find it in every long-established white-dominated institution in the country.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Well, I was just going to say that Jack Straw did lead the Stephen Lawrence steering group and that sort of governmental direction to keep chief officers to make sure race and equality was kept on the agenda. And I would like to think that the government will reintroduce the Stephen Lawrence steering group to make sure that continues and race and equality issues are kept on the agenda.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Leroy.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Brian.
After 8 o'clock, we'll be joined by Paul Anderson-Walsh, who's a friend of the Lawrence family, giving us their reaction to the convictions.
Have a quick look at the time now.